My name is Dr. Simon Fokt. I am a philosopher. Right now I focus on teaching data ethics, and I mostly focus on teaching it to non-philosophers. I mostly teach data scientists, IT professionals, people who are out there in the world making decisions about what technologies we are developing, how we're developing it, what sort of values they embody and things like this. When you look at the history of various ethical or social problems that were caused by various technologies, very rarely, very rarely were they caused because someone was wanting to do the wrong thing. There are no James Bond villains hanging out, and trying to destroy the world. No, most of the time it's people trying to do their best and just failing at it, right? Meta and Facebook are still in court for, $150 billion over the genocide that they have allegedly facilitated in Myanmar. I don't think anyone in Meta woke up in the morning and went I wonder how much money we can make by causing a genocide in Myanmar, right? As soon as there are humans in the picture, you need to think about ethics as well. Ethical scandals that were happening are largely because the companies that are working on various technologies didn't even employ people who would look at those problems, right? But this is also what is happening with AI very much right now, right? When people compare it to Industrial Revolution and all, I think it's absolutely justified. If AI is going to deliver all the things that were promised, we are looking at massive social changes.
Hey everyone, that's Renegade Science Podcast and your host, Marie-Éline Puer. In this podcast, I meet scientists and entrepreneurs that are working on groundbreaking technologies that will eventually change our world. I talk to them about their work and areas of expertise and ask all the burning and stupid questions, the most important of which is, how do we build a great future powered by tech? Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and social media.
Hi, Simon.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here today. Could you first shortly introduce yourself for our listeners and watchers?
Of course, yes. So my name is Dr. Simon Fokt. I am a philosopher. I work in value theory in general, which means that I focus on values that have to do either with aesthetics or with ethics. My research has been mostly in those realms. And right now I focus on teaching data ethics. And I mostly focus on teaching it to non-philosophers. I really like the idea of taking philosophy from its kind of the state in which it is often perceived as being in this ivory tower, blue sky research that doesn't really have very much to do with everyday world concerns, and taking it to very much everyday world concerns and applying it to things such as medicine or, what I teach right now, so data ethics. And I don't teach philosophers, I mostly teach data scientists, IT professionals, people who are out there in the world making decisions about what technologies we are developing, how we're developing it, what sort of values they embody and things like this. And I just think that it's just important that we don't just talk about ethics and philosophy in between academics and then the rest of the world doesn't know what's going on, but rather we kind of make it practical, make it useful for people. So that's what I'm focusing on mostly.
Well, obviously, if you would like to embody ethics and values in technology, you need to work with people who are creating this technology.
Absolutely. I think it's so important that people are aware of the sort of problems that can come up, because I think that most of the time, when you look at the history of various ethical or social problems that were caused by various technologies, very rarely were they caused because someone was wanting to do the wrong thing. Right? There are very few evil people in the world. There are no James Bond villains hanging out, and trying to destroy the world. No, most of the time it's people trying to do their best and just failing at it, right? And most of the time they're failing at it because they just didn't think about something. So I start my lectures, for example, for data scientists, recounting some of the recent big scandals that were happening in the data world. And I don't know if you know, but Meta and Facebook are still in court for, $150 billion over the genocide that they have allegedly facilitated in Myanmar. And basically, I don't think anyone in Meta woke up in the morning and went I wonder how much money we can make by causing a genocide in Myanmar, right? That's not what they thought, right? They didn't intentionally do anything like this. No, what they did was, they were trying to make money and they just didn't think about what could happen, right? Or maybe they, didn't have enough people working on this compared to the number of people who are working on improving the service. Or, maybe they didn't really think through the potential consequences of the algorithm. Or maybe they were, I don't know, they were really focused on some things and they went like, it's gonna be fine. And then it wasn't fine, right? So what I'm trying to do is really kind of get those people who are going to take those roles and make these sort of decisions a bit more aware, so that they don't find themselves in the situation in which something goes wrong and they go like, oh, if only we thought about it a year ago. No, they will actually think about it a year ago, right? So basically the prime aim or objective of my work in this respect is not necessarily to get people really familiar with lots of, ethical theories or specific facts or historical things to do with ethics or whatever. It's to make them sensitive to those issues, to make sure that when they design those technologies, there is a moment in which they will go like, wait, should we think about like how this will impact, people's fair access to services, or how it will impact, the way that people perceive communities, for example, right? Or the kind of like ethical values that we tend to care about as humans.
So what do you tell these non-philosophers when they ask, why do we actually need that?
Right. Well, a lot of the time when people who work on technology ask this sort of question is because they're very focused on the technology part. They're very focused on trying to develop something that is as good as possible at doing its job, and it's as efficient as possible, and it's super streamlined and cost efficient and whatever else, and it delivers the right results. But what they forget in the process is that it's meant for humans to use. The point of the technology isn't that it is super optimized and all that. No, it's meant to serve humans at the end of the day. So this is, I think, the one thing that I always bring up quite early on to tell people, look, as soon as there are humans in the picture, you need to think about ethics as well. Because those humans are not, robots, machines that don't care, they don't have feelings, they don't have their own interests, they don't have their own needs, wants, values, and stuff like that. Should I start again?
No.
Those are not kind of creatures that don't have their own needs, values, and wants and desires. They do, and if this technology is impacting them in some way, and it's frustrating some of those needs or something like that, or is making them, it's changing the power balances between them, for example, or things like this, it is going to have a massive impact on their lives. And as soon as a technology has an impact on somebody's lives, it's bound to happen that someone will get hurt, someone will gain power, someone will lose power, someone will be treated fairly or unfairly, someone will, perceive this as like reducing their capacity to, partake in their community, or like, reduce their connection with their family, or maybe increase their connection with their family. There's a million ways in which this technology or any technology can impact how we as humans live our lives and can enjoy our lives and can be happy in our lives and can, not suffer in our lives as well. And as soon as a technology does something like that, well, it's an ethical issue. So all of those people, I think, who are very focused on, the optimizing of technology itself, writing the best code and whatever else, super important. But what I try to do early on is get them in the room and think, okay, who are the stakeholders in your technology? Who will be using it? Who will be impacted by it? What impact will it have on the wider community, right? And then as soon as they start thinking about the actual humans in the picture, they start understanding, okay, we need to think about that stuff as well. Yeah. So that's my end, basically, when it comes to this.
I would say it's a psychotherapy for tech people who are building tech to make them a little bit more human.
I think so. And I don't mean to judge anyone working in tech. I think that we are all prone to tunnel vision at some point when we're working on something, and especially if we're really passionate about something, right? We tend to really focus on the one problem we're trying to solve, and we're kind of pushing the other things on the side. And I think that many of the big kind of ethical scandals that were happening are largely because the companies that are working on various technologies didn't even employ people who would look at those problems, right? Because they had this tunnel vision on sorting out, like, delivering the most efficient service, right?
Are you talking about Telegram right now?
Well, that's potentially an example. Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, this is also what is happening with AI very much right now, right? I mean, a few months ago, there was this big scandal when half of the alignment team, or I think most of the alignment team, walked out of OpenAI because they went like, well, they never gave us resources to actually work and address those ethical problems because they're so focused on the efficiency issue, on developing, as good a product as possible, that they just have this tunnel vision and they potentially, I mean, that's one interpretation of what's happening. I'm obviously not in OpenAI. I don't really know how it panned out, but it sure seemed like they're very focused on one thing and they kind of like don't pay attention to other things. And I think this is really interesting when you think of attention as this kind of limited resource that we have. So as humans, we can only focus on that many things at a time. And there's good psychology and neuroscience research on what attention is and how it works, and how it means that we not only, when we pay attention to something, we can, devote so many resources to it and all that, but also when this kind of spotlight of our mind is on something, everything else goes dark, right? And we suddenly don't pay attention to all of the other things that later on end up, blowing up in our face potentially, or somebody else's face. And then someone says like, well, how did you not notice this? And we say like, yeah, now it's obvious when we're looking back. But at the time, our attention was on something different and this was in the dark. So, it's another thing that I try to really bestow upon my students, which is that it's worth paying attention to those things. Because a lot of the time, in this more technical education that people are getting, they're not told that. And we can't blame people for not knowing what nobody taught them, right? If they were never told that they should pay attention to it, they won't pay attention to it. So I see it as my role to jump in there and kind of say like, look guys, the spotlight that's here, maybe a little bit of it should go there as well. Yeah.
Yeah, so since we already mentioned AI, which is a very hot topic right now, what kind of ethical conundrums or dilemmas you can envision when we will see this full rise of artificial intelligence?
Oh my God, so many. I mean, when people compare it to Industrial Revolution and all, I think it's absolutely justified. I mean, if AI is going to deliver all the things that were promised, which is not really that clear at this point, then we are looking at massive social changes. And I think that, the one thing that I think is going to be potentially the biggest challenge, or what I like to focus on, what I see as the biggest challenge for humans, is that we will need to redefine our own value, where our value comes from as humans. Because right now, our value, like how we have our own self-worth. Why do I respect somebody else? How do I decide what is someone's standing in society, what their status is, that sort of thing, is very tied to our productivity. Is very tied to our achievement. Is very tied to what we can give to others that others need, right? Well, if we live in a society in which most of the value in the world is not produced by humans anymore, right? Because we have AIs that do that better. If it turns out that potentially we live in a society in which technically nobody needs to work, for example, right? Or in which certain problems that we have been struggled with are resolved, and maybe there are just not that many problems to solve for humans because the AIs will solve them better, right? Then we need to ask ourselves, well, what is the point of us? Right? And that's like that's the typical question that I get asked so much as a philosopher when someone, less familiar with philosophy meets me and wants to ask something is like, what is the point of all of it? Right? Well, it's such a broad question. But it kind of opens a new facet of this question. Like, what is the point of us? Why are we doing what we're doing? And I think it's a massive question. And it's really interesting because that's another kind of avenue of my research that I've been doing. I've been working on modern masculinity as well, and about how many men these days are a bit lost in the world, partially because the reason for their existence that was rooted in work has disappeared. And so often when people talk about why certain communities of especially working class men are disillusioned with society, disillusioned with globalization, tending to vote against kind of more progressive values and all that, one of the roots of this is that the meaning of their life that they had in their work has been taken away. Because we don't need men with big muscles anymore to lift things, because we've got machines that do that, right? We don't need men who, use their physical attributes in certain ways, because we've got machines for that. And all of this production has been, moved somewhere else anyway. So a lot of this kind of social disgruntlement and social unhappiness and very personal unhappiness comes from the fact that those people have lost their
identity, part of their identity.
What am I for, And I think that potentially with AI, we are looking at something like that, but worldwide.
We're looking into the abyss. And it looks back.
Humans are pretty good at finding themselves new reasons to live, right? Or new goals or new things. But I think that with Industrial Revolution, which also introduced a massive, upheaval of that sort, that thing played out over a century. And, some countries are still not really fully industrialized, right? And I think that with AI revolution, this is going to play out much quicker. And humans take time to get used to things. And it's difficult to get used to things. And sometimes people will never get used to things. They just will die thinking the way they were thinking. And it's only their children or grandchildren that will be used to the new reality, right? And when change is happening so fast and so many people lose their reason to live, or that's too much to say, right? But lose the system which they used to determine their own value and the value of others disappears or changes massively, then a lot of people will be lost in life. And I think that has a lot of downstream effects, because people who are unhappy in life tend to express it in various ways. And that has social consequences. I really think that, as a society, we should probably brace ourselves for a fair deal of, these sort of questions being asked, and not necessarily asked in a kind and peaceful way.
Yeah, this is one of concerns, I would say, that many people may lose jobs, may lose some part of their identity defined by their professional life, may lost some meaning. But there are many other questions, like what if AI makes an error, a mistake that leads to negative consequences? Who should be responsible for that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that this is, it's at the end of the day, it's some sort of social agreement that we will need to enter with respect to this. And I think that this is potentially a question that is a bit less groundbreaking than we might think. Because we already have artificial intelligences. We have had artificial intelligences for centuries, right? Intelligences that are not humans. And those are superhuman entities, such as companies. Organizations, right? So those
but they're all humans.
Yeah, of course. But within the company, we're not really humans. We are our roles. We are the positions that we hold in a company, right? It's not that, the company is a legal entity, and if the company causes damage to someone, it's the company that goes to court. It's not a specific person. And then within the company, potentially there's other rules and regulations with regards to this, right? But it could be parallel, right? So because we already have this precedent, potentially if an AI as another artificial entity causes damage, it could be resolved in a somewhat similar way, right? Technically you're suing the AI, for example, but then there are people who are responsible for certain things in its operation. Therefore, they will be, the ones who are actually bearing the consequences. And also, I'm not sure. That will depend also on things like currently companies can own things. Will AI be able to own things? Because, you can fine a company because the company has money. Can you fine an AI? Well, that depends, right? If the AI will have money or not.
I have an example here. that recently Brian Armstrong, the head of Coinbase, he posted that they've registered first transaction, which one AI performed together with another AI. So one AI bought tokens to use another AI. And in fact, AI cannot have yet a bank account, but he, she, I don't know, can own crypto. So I think that we are already somewhere on the verge of this dilemma.
Absolutely. And I think this is a question that we will need to start asking ourselves potentially sooner rather than later. I mean, we should be asking this question ourselves already now, if not for quite a while, because it's good to be prepared for these sort of things. You know, we might not yet have fully conscious artificial intelligences, but it's kind of good to know how we will treat them before we have them, so that when we have them, it's not a surprise. And then we, I mean, humans are really good at arriving at the right solution, but only after they tested all the wrong ones first, right? So I feel like with these sort of things, obviously this is a very high stakes situation. Can we afford to, develop those things through trial and error? Well, it would be good if we thought about it already now and had the solution ready. And the solution is obviously to the question, well, what rights do we give that sort of AI? Right? Does it have the right to own property? Does it have the right to, bodily autonomy, whatever that means, in terms of, its servers not being damaged, for example, or things like this? Does it have, rights to, inherit things, for example? Does it have rights to not be insulted? That sort of thing. I mean, there's so many questions, right? And we don't really have answers to those questions yet. And it's not, again, like it's, some of the things that we are facing with AI are new questions because they're just completely and utterly new. And some of them are just rehashed versions of questions that we had for other things already, right? So we've been asking ourselves those questions with respect to animals, right? What rights should animals have? And we have arrived at some sort of conclusions. And you can go like, well, are they the right conclusions or not? We can debate this, but as a society, we have thought about it. We also have lots of historical precedent on denying rights to those who definitely should have them. And that obviously goes for women, for various racial groups that are ethnic
dolphins.
Groups. And dolphins, absolutely. But, it's a big discussion right now as to whether certain animals that are very intelligent should have certain rights, like to what extent, experimenting on chimpanzees is ethical or not, right? And we are effectively experimenting on AIs as well. Is that ethical or not? I think that this is like one of those questions that we have been already asking ourselves, but it comes with a twist, because none of the persons or entities or animals that we have been asking this question about in the past had the potential to be infinitely more powerful than us, right? I mean, if you annoy something that potentially in some time can outsmart you, outrun you, outpower you, you might kind of think a bit more carefully where you're going with this. Yeah.
Yes, and here we arrive to the question of a powerful and sentient AI.
Mm-hmm.
And first I want to ask the philosopher, what is conscious and how can we define it?
Right. I see those. I love those moments in which people start realizing that the questions that philosophers have been asking for centuries, and everyone want what's the point in this? Like, who cares what consciousness exactly is or whatever? And now it's just like, oh yeah, it's actually a practical issue. As a philosopher, I have this moment of like, right.
Oh yeah.
So this is a question that people have been asking for ages, and it's not, it is particularly relevant right now with respect to AI, but it is relevant with respect to just us, each other, right? How do we define what conscious is with respect to I don't know, humans who are very different from us, right? With respect to animals, with respect to humans who have medical conditions, which are, somehow deprive them of certain faculties that are typical of humans, like, I know, reasoning or emotions or whatever else. And there are many definitions that people give, and none of them is satisfying, unfortunately. People try to define consciousness in terms of intelligence or ability to process information or things like this. But I mean, by that definition, again, companies are conscious, right? Or other artificial intelligences that are not even the sort of AI that we're talking right now would be conscious. I mean, they can process information, they can arrive at logical conclusions and stuff like this. Probably not the answer. Then people go like, well, it might be able to reason, it might give you the right answers, but it doesn't feel. And then you go like, well, yeah, but dogs probably also have feelings, right?
But how do you know that? This is my main question.
And also, that is a very good question, and that is what I'm getting at right now, because then people are also, like when philosophers talk about this, we usually talk about consciousness in terms of subjective experience, of what we call qualia, the kind of what it is like to experience something. So there's something that I know the color red looks like to me, right? If I'm wearing this and I look at it, this is like a way that it looks like to me as a subjective experience that I have, right? And that is like a defining mark of what it is to be conscious, is to be aware of the fact that you're having experiences, be aware of your own existence, but also be aware of the fact that you're seeing something and perceiving it in a certain way, right? And the discussions that have been happening in philosophy so far, before artificial intelligence kind of brought it to the fore, had to do with, well, how do I know that you have that? Like, I have no idea. Maybe you're a cleverly disguised robot, right? We call them philosophical zombies. The philosophical zombies are kind of like functionally, acting in exactly the same ways as humans. But, it's just like you just get some input and produce some output based on whatever computation you're doing inside. But there is actually nothing that the color red looks like to you. You're not aware of your own existence, I'm assuming here. Please don't take it personally. For the sake of the argument, I have, as a person who thinks, I think I'm conscious, obviously, I have no proof, no evidence whatsoever that any of you people are conscious. I might be living in a simulation. I have no idea. And there's no way for me to know. Because if I ask you and you tell me, everything you say is consistent with the theory that you're just a cleverly disguised robot or a simulation, right? So the fact that we don't know that about AI is kind of not really a new thing. I'm not meaning to say like it's not a new thing as in like, oh, aren't we philosophers smart? We thought about it ages ago, right? That's not the point. The point is that when it comes to us deciding what we will do about this, it will be kind of similar as to how we decided about humans. And we have been historically really bad at this because, we have historically decided that, I don't know, people of African ethnic descent are not human or not human enough to have rights, for example, right? We have historically decided that women are not human enough to have certain rights, right? Why would we be better now? I mean, we're discussing this, but there's very strong sentiments to kind of just we can massage the evidence, to suit what we want to think. Because there is no hard proof that you are conscious or that this machine is conscious or that someone else is conscious, right? There is no absolutely defeating thing. I can still, whatever evidence you give me, I can still think that you're not really, that you're just a simulation or whatever, right? Because of that, there is no point in which you can just, slap someone in the face and say no, you're wrong. And you need to, just accept reality. Because they can always say, no, I still don't think, I'm still not convinced. And I think that when it comes to AI right now, we're potentially marching into something like this, right? There will always be kind of selfish reasons for humans to go nah, it's not intelligent enough yet, or it's not conscious enough yet, because we want to use it, right? I mean, it's so much more convenient for us to not give it rights. Because if we don't give it rights, then, well, we don't need to worry about its rights, right? We can just exploit it the same way we've been exploiting slaves in the past, yeah? Or the same way we've been exploiting, I don't know, free domestic labor of women, right? Or the same way, I know, we've been exploiting people from, other ethnic backgrounds. And, there's strong incentives to not treated as a human. And I think that, yeah, it's a big discussion that is not unfortunately resolvable on the level of like objective facts about this. We just need to somehow reach a social agreement about this at some point. I think it's going to be really interesting, and especially it's going to be really interesting because there's this one kind of like division of this, of what sort of question are we asking? Are we asking the metaphysical question of, is it actually conscious? And this question is, I think, unanswerable, right? The same way as the question of, are you actually conscious? To me, is unanswerable. I take it at faith, I trust it, that's it. But then this is the metaphysical question, but then also there's just the kind of practical or legal question. Like, do we treat each other as conscious? And this is, a question of, do we give each other's rights, for example, and things like this. And this practical question will need to get resolved somehow. Yeah.
Definitely, because already now I'm reading in the news that in South Korea is very well developed in terms of robotics. And there was an article that a robot who even owned an ID card, who was able to move between the floors on itself, and who was helping and was treated as an employee, as a comrade by his South Korean friends. He committed suicide by falling from the stairs. And now they are investigating this accident to find out what happened exactly. And in this article, for me, it was more interesting, not that if robot committed suicide or just fell down, but how humans interpreted this situation. So many people felt that it was a suicide. So in this specific country, South Korea, where people live alongside robots, they already started to perceive them as sentient beings who are able to suffer, have depression, whatever, and even commit suicide. And this is, for me, it's mind-blowing.
But I think this is kind of exactly what I was talking about a moment ago. It's like we don't really know, so we tend to interpret things. Yeah, and humans are really good at anthropomorphizing things. I mean, you draw a table and add googly eyes to it, and it suddenly starts looking like it has character, right? Or something like that. I mean, humans are really good at that sort of thing. And I think that there is an argument to be made that there's nothing conscious in that, because, suicide would require some form of consciousness, because it would require that to first understand that I'm alive, to understand your own existence, to know what it feels like to be alive, and to make a plan and to execute this plan with some sort of consciousness of what you're doing, right? So we're assuming that is what's happened, or the people who are interpreting it as suicide are assuming that is what happened. But people are anthropomorphizing lots of, ascribing much higher cognitive faculties to animals, for example, than animals are actually able of having, for example, or seeing them having plans for future or something like that. That's not really possible. So I think that, again, it's like one of those situations in which the evidence could support either interpretation. And because we don't really know what's happening inside the box, it's hard to tell. I think it's also kind of pointing to a potential other distinction when it comes to this consciousness question, which is we're asking ourselves if those AIs will be conscious, but there is a hidden assumption in that. And the assumption is that it will be conscious in the way we are conscious.
Maybe
it will be similar to us.
Maybe it just does not want to show it to us.
Well, but I think it's also question is, would it be conscious in the way that we are conscious? Would it see the world in the way that we are conscious? Would it, there's a lot of really interesting science fiction on this topic that is exploring the question of like meeting, that's not with AIs, it's usually with like meeting some alien races or something like this, right? And the question is, well, if it turns out that life evolved somewhere on some other planet to, I don't know, not be carbon-based, to not be made of vaguely solid matter, for example, right? That sort of things. Would it actually think the way we think? So for example, there is a famous piece by this Polish author Stanisław Lem, one of my favorite authors, wrote the book called Solaris. It was made into a couple of movies, and in there you have this kind of like sentient ocean that the characters are trying to explore and understand and all that. And the whole point of the book is that it is just beyond our understanding. It is a conscious living thing, but it's just so utterly different from us that humans just cannot comprehend it somehow. It's like and there's like loads of books like this, like the Annihilation series by, what's his name, Jeff Vandermeer, and lots of other things like this. And I think that it's an interesting question to ask. Will AI, which is embodied in a very different way from humans, if it is conscious, will it be conscious in a way that we will even understand, right? Or that will be to us meaningful, or like what we will associate with, or something like this. Like, the people were kind of projecting humanity on this robot, but maybe if this robot even is conscious, it's just conscious in a completely different way that doesn't necessarily make sense to us. Because, for example, nature equipped us with what psychologists call system 1 and system 2 thinking, right? So system 1 is this kind of fast, intuitive thinking that evolved because we needed to quickly escape from danger or quickly run for something or whatever else. And it's kind of, it's what we usually refer to as our emotions, or kind of very fast reactions. That's where stereotypes come in, these sort of things. And system 2 thinking is the more deliberative, thinking for a while. Or is this thing that's lying in the undergrowth, is that a stick or is it a snake? Let me look and decide. Does it have legs? Does it have twigs? I don't know. Like if you were doing this, you'd probably be bitten by a snake 50 times by now and you would die. So nature evolved system 1 thinking for us, which means that like, oh, it looks a bit like a snake, I'd better run. And you have this emotional reaction and you go away, right? Now, this is a very defining feature of what it is to be a human. Right? It is probably one of the main things that gives us emotions. Emotions being those kind of shortcut, very fast ways to quickly react to something without overthinking it. Like if you maybe thought about it for a while, you would come to the same conclusion that your emotion gives you, but emotions are just faster, right? It is what gives us things like our propensity to, see things in a stereotypical way, right? Or for black and white thinking. Or for being more interested in things that are more extreme rather than more in the middle, that sort of thing, right? And it's a big deal for how we perceive the world, yeah? But machines don't have that. Like we've not designed them to have that sort of distinction, right?
Well, we try, actually. We try to embed some moral, equal features, and usually it ends very badly because all the LLMs were trained on the huge corpus of internet data, which is far from being moral or equal. That's why we get all kinds of biases that look even more ridiculous when they are being fixed, because it entails like another extreme, and which looks really stupid. So it looks like it's hard to, even if you try to give a machine a human reasoning, and a way to think in the way human thinks, it's quite hard. Although it's like for us, it's so natural, but for to reproduce it, maybe we don't have yet the tech, but I know that scientists are working on it, on creating LLMs with common sense. which is very interesting.
I'm really curious about this because, like, if we are doing it, we will be also doing it in a different way than nature has done it for us, right? I'm really curious. I mean, I don't know exactly how this will pan out, but I do think that there is this kind of disjoint between how our minds have structured so that they can respond to the world, and the world of AIs is different, and the ways they are structured to respond to their world is different. And it also has to do with embodiment, I think. So this is something that when I worked at the University of Edinburgh, this was like the department, and that was really big with Andy Clark and other people on the question of embodied cognition. Mm-hmm. And the idea is that we're not brains on sticks, right? We have bodies, and we are thinking with our brains, but we're also perceiving the world and thinking and processing information with everything, right? And it means that when we perceive the world, we see it as kind of fit for the sort of creatures that we are, right? So do we perceive certain things as, convenient or inconvenient? It depends on how we're embodied, right? If we perceive certain things as accessible, inaccessible, or other things like this, right? And there's a lot of feelings or the ways we perceive the world which have to do with our body. So for example, how do you know you're uncomfortable sitting in this chair?
Because my back hurts.
Yeah?
Yeah, well, my ass is numb.
But it's one of those things that at some point, when I ask you, you can answer this question, right? But it's not like you're thinking about it all the time.
Well, I just feel it. I have some stimulus.
You just know.
Yeah.
It's just it just feels a certain way. And it feels that way because you've got a body, right? And the question is, I don't know, do you know what it feels like to be, to be saved onto smaller hard drive? Well, you have no idea, right? But the question is, well, maybe for an AI it does feel a certain way, right? Or there's so basically there is a certain question of embodiment as well, right? So because we are embodied in physical bodies, we perceive the world in a certain way. And it also has to do with our built-in temporality. We know we will die, right? We know that we are fragile in certain ways. We know that we can get sick, right? We know that, if we fall down the stairs, this and this and that might happen, right? Those questions those situations will have different implications for life forms that are not carbon-based, for example, right? That are not necessarily needing to die. We know that we cannot, for example, make a copy of ourselves. Yeah? Well, okay, we can have children, but we can have clones, but it's not the same, right? Because
the clone is a copy, no?
Yes, but if you clone yourself right now, it's going to be a baby that will grow up with different life experiences. You cannot clone yourself with all your thoughts, feelings, and history and everything else that you've got.
Yeah, we try to solve it, but it doesn't work yet.
Yeah, potentially. Potentially this will be possible at some point, but right now it's not. Whereas this will not be a problem for an AI, right? So what I'm trying to say in here is, once again, coming back to this difference between what we think of when we ask, is this thing conscious? Is it conscious per se, or is it conscious like we are conscious? Or is it conscious in its own way? That is seeing the world very differently, right? There's not necessarily sharing our, there's some ways in which the world feels like to us. It might be completely different for it. Yeah?
Yeah, but then it's a question of if it's even conscious in a different way, is it conscious enough for us to grant it some rights and to be equal to us? This is a very complex question.
Absolutely. And like I was saying before, humans unfortunately have a very rich history of denying others rights when they probably should have given them rights. So, we'll see.
I've recently started to read a Nexus book by Mr. Harari. Mm-hmm. And in the very beginning, he reviews several ways and several opinions about information. So it's a book about information networks. And so-called naive way for him is a belief that more information, more data, better outcomes. So if something does not work well, we just need a bit more data or more clear data of higher quality, and then we will be able to fix it. So all the problems of this world are because of not enough information, or this information is not analyzed in a good way. And I think that many people who are over optimistic towards technology, they think in this way. And also all LLMs probably are built this way right now. And it does not work because it costs billions trying to fit into one model all the knowledge of civilization and hope that in response it will produce best outcomes. But it looks like that it all boils down to the point that it's not about the information, it's very much about humans, ethics, and society.
Absolutely. So to people who think like this, I have one word: COVID. Think about how the pandemic unfolded. The problems we had and the reason why it ended up being so horrible had nothing to do with lack of information or technology. It had everything to do with how people reacted to it. And it was a social problem. It was not a technical problem, right? Even once we had the vaccine, you couldn't get people to vaccinate. Why? Well, because people have their values, people have their beliefs, people distrust things, people have, all sorts of ways of approaching the world, which is absolutely not solely driven by the right or the rational thing to do. That's just not how humans operate, right? And similarly, when you have all of those technologies that are entering the market, like the way people adopt them varies massively, right? I don't know if you know about, how Uber was received when it first came in. Now Waymo had all of those self-driving cars that they started putting up as taxis in San Francisco or somewhere, I think. And then, you have burned cars, for example, because people rebel against those things. It's like, but like the way people interact with those technologies is really what matters. And this is coming back to what I was saying at the beginning. We're not creating those technologies, for technology's sake. No, we're creating them for humans to use. And the moment you have a human in the loop, well, you have ethical questions. You need to worry about things like, well, what do those people actually care about? How does it impact their everyday lives? What values that they have does it promote? And what of the values of the things that they care about does it endanger, right? And with, the various things that we've learned through the pandemic, I think, it's pretty obvious that people are very diverse when it comes to how they answer these sort of questions.
This is such a round term.
And have very
diverse.
And have very different priorities, right? And it's like, we all had globally, it's a fantastic case study. We globally had the same problem. Every country solved it differently, right? And the way that people reacted to it had very little to do with the rational arguments behind it, and a lot to do with their cultural background, with their religious beliefs, with what they think is, how they perceive their role in society, for example, what gives them happiness, what makes them feel, how happy are they to feel controlled or not controlled? Do they value safety or do they value freedom, right? These sort of things. And people are massively different. There are cultural differences, which mean that some, groups will think more likely this way or more likely that way. And there are individual differences when it comes to this. And those things just need to be taken into account. And very often, like I said at the beginning, the people who are designing technologies are so focused on optimizing the technology itself that they forget that, well, this technology will be used by humans, and all those humans have all of those different values, different wants, different desires, different needs, and all of that.
So how high is the probability that we will get a Luddite movement?
A Luddite movement?
Luddites, yeah, Luddites.
All right. I think that if this turns out to be as massive a social change as it is made out to be, I think it's pretty likely, absolutely. I mean, it's like, there will be people who will be vehemently opposing it, and there will be people who will be loving it. And I think, like, the question isn't necessarily, how do we make everyone happy with this, but it's like, how do we make sure that, like, the values that we have as humans are not somehow endangered in the process, or like are secondary to, the progress, whatever it means. Like, so often you hear things like, oh, we cannot overthink this because it's stifling innovation, or it's because, it's slowing down progress and all that. But like, who is this innovation for? Like, we're not progressing for the sake of progress. We're progressing for the sake of making people's lives better, right? And we've been just talking about, like, technologies such as, Airbnb, right? And you can reasonably, I think, ask the question, if you actually look on the whole, if Airbnb has been a net positive for the world or not. Like, it's very hard to quantify this sort of thing, right? Because obviously it seems like a net positive when you're booking a holiday, but when you want to rent a flat in places such as popular holiday destinations like Barcelona or Lisbon or something, turns out it's hard, because this technology has massively affected, like, the fabric of society, basically, like how we value property, right? Or what do we consider to be, rental, for example, right? Or what do we, like, how is ownership of property meaningful? Or for what reasons do you, and how we interact. And I think that when you look at these sort of things, I think it's useful to sometimes stop and go like, wait, was that a good idea? And maybe it was, but like, it's not an obvious answer. And I think that very often people go like, but we need to innovate. We need to make more of those things because progress, right? And you go like, is it actually for our good? I think it's not an easy question to answer. And right now, for example, when we have the, very quickly we'll probably get rid of human-driven taxis, and we will get, self-driving car taxis. It's also a big question of like, is this, as we replace humans in so many other domains with AI, it's also a question of, are we gaining something? Or is it perhaps better to like not have some things? And I think it also comes down to the question that is brought up by, maybe I'll tie it with this, is brought up by people who talk about self-improvement or like finding value in life or kind of leading a meaningful life, right? And that has to do with intentional strife. And the fact that our present culture is very much focused on making your life as convenient as possible, as easy as possible. But ask yourself this, if you're taking a helicopter to the peak of, I don't know, Mont Blanc or somewhere, and you just jump out in there, will you go like, yes, I conquered this mountain, I did
Marcel would say, yes.
Well, there is something in like actually putting your boots on and walking up the bloody mountain that makes you, that has value, right?
Yeah, it's an adventure, it's
exactly.
an experience.
And like, if you make everything so easy that you just get it without the effort, you're kind of, again, devoiding life of some meaning, right? You're taking away something that makes us feel like we're alive, like there's a point to all of it, right? And as we are doing something like that with various technologies, I think it's also a good question to ask ourselves. Oh, this is an interesting question that various European countries have been asking themselves when deciding to stop training on Sundays. Right? Mm-hmm. This is a thing that we have done in Germany right now. On Sundays, shops are closed, right? Restaurants are open and all that. And we could open them. It would be more convenient. But as a society, we have decided that it takes something away from us, right? And having more convenience is actually not a good trade-off for, the freedom or the rest or the capacity to just not feel like we're always on, or something like that. So many people are talking about that right now with respect to laws to do with limiting, how is it called? The right to switch off or something like this in various countries. In Britain, they're talking about this right now, right?
In Australia, I think.
Yeah. And it's, once again, this kind of like thing that we realize that, okay, there is a value to productivity, but it's eating away something else that is really important to us, right? It's eating away, I don't know, our work-life balance. It's eating away our, feeling of life satisfaction or something like this, right? Or our ability to form communities, or to have time with your family, or even just to self-reflect or have time for yourself. And I think that these sort of questions are worthwhile questions to ask ourselves with respect to every kind of technology as well that we're producing. Okay, it's giving us something, but like, is it actually a good trade-off? Because maybe something else is taken away as well. So if it's giving us, easy access to holiday homes, but it's taking away our capacity to, not spend most of our money on rent, or, potentially creating massive social divisions or big problems for cities or whatnot, then I think it's a good question to ask. And then this kind of whole narrative that we should always push forward and progress and innovate and all that, you go like, I'm actually kind of with the European Union on this. When you look at the difference between
You're in a good company.
Exactly. When you look at the difference between the US and Europe in this respect, yes, the US is moving much faster because they're not regulating those things. But in Europe, I have 6 weeks of holidays. In Europe, I don't worry that my privacy is going to be abused quite as much, right? There's so many protections that I have that I don't elsewhere. And I'd much rather live in here because I don't really, it's like, why do you need a new iPhone, right? Why do you need it? Well, so that you can be 20% faster in doing all of the things that you don't need to actually do.
Yay.
Great, right? Hooray. So, I feel like maybe innovation for the sake of innovation as fast as possible, it's not always what's in human interest. And sometimes, I don't know, it's more useful to kind of like stop and ask those questions. And I know it's massively difficult because we live in this world in which, we're in this constant, or companies are in this constant, prisoner's dilemma, or like, that causes the tragedy of the commons of just like everyone racing as fast as possible because if we don't do it, then they will do it. Nobody said that's easy. But I think that it's not obvious. It's not at all obvious that we should always innovate for the sake of innovation, for the sake of progress. I don't think so.
Plus, what founders of Airbnb or Google or whatever other company that grew enormously huge, what should they do? The first motto of Google was, don't be evil. I love it. Don't be evil.
Yeah.
And what should happen? So you were able to build something really big, and then you find out that it does bad things. And you're like, oh, okay, I held down the operations, everybody go home. And then this person thinks, I have a company that gives jobs to thousands and thousands people. Yeah, so if now I will stop that, they won't have a job. So I will affect badly their life. So it looks like there is this conundrum has no way to get out of it.
Yeah, of course. I mean, if there were easy answers, life would be boring, right? There is no easy answer to any of that, absolutely. And it's not like, so this is what I try to teach my students as well, is that nobody's arguing that we should just not do all of those things, not innovate. Absolutely not. It's only that in the process of doing it, we are making certain design choices. And the things that we're designing will take the shape that we will give it, right? And it's not true that despite of what Mark Zuckerberg and others might tell you with respect to their platforms. It's just like, no, it's not that we are evil, it's just what people put on this platform, We're just providing a service, right? It's not true. The way you design a technology makes this technology better or worse at certain things. It nudges people in a certain direction. This kind of like instrumentalist approach to technology is just not true. And you can see that quite easily when you compare, for example, I don't know, when you compare dating apps, right? Because like you have different dating apps and they specifically distinguish themselves by saying that they designed their apps in such a way that they nudge people towards a certain way of interacting, right? So, Tinder is different from Bumble, right? Because Bumble empowers women more, for example, right? That's so it says. It's different from OkCupid because OkCupid is meant to give you a bit more in-depth, connection or something like that. And like if technology was just completely value neutral and it was just purely about what people do on it, this would not be a thing, right? But no, the way they are designed, some specific little design choices, such as who answers messages or what sort of like questions are asked by the platform or how many hoops do you need to jump before you match with someone or something like that, right? They nudge people into a certain type of interacting on this platform. And these are design choices that people who design those platforms have made in the design process. So similarly as this, when we design new technologies, we can make choices about how those technologies will be used by designing in certain features that make using them in a more pro-social, ethical or other ways easier and make it more difficult to use them in certain other ways, right? And obviously, yes, at the end of the day, people will be using them in different ways and we will not have control over this. And there is absolutely no way we should be holding responsible, the founders of all of those massive tech giants, because they could not have predicted how it will unfold in the future. But throughout the whole process, they were making design choices, right? As to, will this be the sort of platform on which we are banning people who spread hate or not, right? Do we have resolution centers? So do you know, for example, with, I think, Meta, there's a whole scandal as well about how many resolution centers they have across the world on different continents. And it turns out that in North America and in Europe, they have all of those resolution centers. And in the entirety of Africa, they had one, right? And you go like, well, you've made a choice to create an environment in which when people have a problem with this platform being misused, they have nowhere to go, right? Or you have, decided that, I don't know, the people who are taking down content that is flagged as potentially inflammatory or something like this, either there are enough of those people who will do it in a certain region or there isn't enough, right? Or maybe reporting is a difficult process, or maybe, reviewing the reports is complicated, or maybe the bot that is doing the reviews is biased in one way or another, right? Those are all design things or design choices that have been made in the process of creating this thing. And right now, now that we have a little bit more discussion about these sort of things, people are starting to make those choices a bit more consciously. At the time in which companies grow and follow the principle of move fast and break things, they don't tend to think about these sort of things, right? They don't make those choices consciously. I mean, they make those choices anyway, but they usually make those choices without really thinking about it, right? So that's, I don't know, they're not trying to be evil. They're just not trying to be good. Right? And I think that if we as societies, countries, governments, teachers kind of force people to think about those things, we have the opportunity to say like, okay, yes, absolutely innovate, absolutely progress, everything, right? But like not so fast that you don't have time to actually think about how to make this good, how to make the choices that will make this technology serve people and not go against their values, needs, and wants.
I think it clicks very well with a very first topic that we touched in our discussion, that no one, probably no creator of any technology, excluding nuclear weapon, created this technology, or most of technologies are created for doing something good. So very little scientists or founders, they create something with bad intentions. Yeah, so just somewhere on the way, it's getting lost, or not thought through enough.
Absolutely, and this is one of the things that I always tell my students as well when I ask them to do assignments in which they're meant to think of designing a new technology or something like this. And it's like, think how this technology will be used by someone who is power hungry, think how this technology will be used for sex, and think how this technology will be used by someone who really wants to make as much money as possible and doesn't care about anything else, right? Because those are the three things that will probably happen. Yeah? And then at some point, and every technology will be probably used like this in one way or another. So again, like as designers of those things, and also as regulators post hoc, we have the power to, well, think about it before and design it in such a way that, well, it's harder to abuse. Right? It's not that obvious. There's better oversight. There's more transparency in it. It's not so easy to get away with things, for example, right?
This is brilliant. So power hungry, sex and money.
It's going to happen, you know. Truth is, it's going to happen. I mean, you're laughing, but right now I had a group of students who were doing a project last year on AI companions, right? So basically AIs that are kind of virtual boyfriend and girlfriend, right? And that's a good example, I think, of also like, should we go this way? And if yes, then in what way, right? So my worry when starting this project with them was that these sort of companions have potentially two like objectives. One is to, you know, be a believable boyfriend-girlfriend experience, something like this. And another is to make the user happy, right? Now, if the objective is to make the user happy, then it will probably not be a very believable boyfriend-girlfriend, right? Because, well, real humans don't always do what you want, right? They will not be what you want them to be all the time, right? But if you want to make your customer happy, as the producer of this sort of thing, you are inclined for your product to be satisfying to the customer, which means that the product will be doing what the customer wants, right? But the question is, well, what does it teach people then, right? And this is like, I don't know where we're heading with this right now, but I can totally envisage a future in which, you know, it's normal to, the same way as for kids today, it is normal to learn about sex from pornography, which was not an issue, you know, however many years ago. It might be normal for people to learn about what it is like to be in a relationship before they get in a relationship with a human from being in a relationship with an AI, right? Question is, what will it teach them, right? And will it teach them to, for example, always expect your partner to do what you want them to do, right? Will it teach you to, you know, not take into account that your partner might want something different, yeah, or not? Similarly, I don't imagine that it will take long before, you know, this will be combined with physical robots, real dolls, or whatever else, and it will teach people about sex, the same things that it teaches them about relationships, right? Like your partner is there to serve your pleasure only, right? And then, you know, like what does it teach us about, and like, does it actually make us better humans, or does it make us worse humans? And I think this is a absolutely ripe kind of like environment or like domain in which the exact problems that I was bringing up before, like we need to ask ourselves the question, is it a net positive or a net negative, will arise, right? Because this technology will absolutely be used by someone who, you know, wants to give people relationships and sex, for example. Will it teach them the right things?
I already put your questions to a good use, so I can envision a very authentic AI companion that tells you, no sex today, I have a headache. So if you want, pay for the premium mode and we can do that.
Exactly. Great models.
Thank you, Simon. That was brilliant.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Super interesting conversation.
Thanks a lot.